12 hours later.
So much has happened since the last time we recorded and this time we recorded.
You can't see us, but we're sitting outside of a burning mansion, covered in blood and soot, sharing a cigarette.
Yep.
Everyone we know is dead.
God, that movie's so good. Yeah, so much has happened. There were like 5 things I was like, I'm gonna bring that up, and I can't remember what they were now.
Oh no.
And now I'm like, the one thing I was gonna bring up was like, doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. Feels inappropriate for the topic we have today. So
okay. Maybe next time. After the Frogman episode, I was told that there needs to be a full bangability ranking for Disney characters. Sorry, folks. There's the Spring Squirrelies. Everyone was a little Twitter pated.
Yes, I still think there's a tail end of those, but like maybe things will slow down a little bit. I don't know. Work's been weird. Socially, things have been weird. I went to a different state yesterday. That was fun.
We don't mention the state.
Yeah.
Up north.
Yeah. I was actually like thinking about this, and then when it came out, it sounded stupid when I was telling my husband, but where we were at, I was like, this street, because it had like the median strip, and it had like 2 lanes on one side and 2 lanes on the other, and I was like, this street's really like geared around the road itself, like all of, and I was like, this is coming out so stupidly, but I meant like we drove by like a McDonald's, and the McDonald's had like a retro drive, like it was only a drive-through like McDonald's. There was no seating for like inside, and a lot of the restaurants and stuff around there were like I saw Caribou Coffee, and I was like, oh, I haven't seen one of those in a hot minute.
I know exactly where you were when you saw that Caribou Coffee.
And I was like, everything is like drive-throughable. And I said, it's just so interesting to me that this is like all based around the road. And I was like, well, of course, Beth, that's how like streets and cities work, is they're like they put stuff. But I was like, because I'm up north and like, being around like Ford is from,
I was just gonna say, you're around an area that is heavily influenced by the automobile industry.
Yes,
and therefore they think about things with infrastructure that reflect that.
Yes, and I just thought that was really interesting, and I was like, well, this is cool and really nerdy to be like thinking while I'm trying to drive.
Yeah,
I also saw a Krispy Kreme, and I was like, man, those are like rare around here too, and in Ohio.
Was there a Tim Hortons?
I did not see, but I did see a Big B's, which I was like, that makes sense because that's a Michigan-based company. So
yeah. Maybe they're pushing out the T-Hos now. I just remember like northwestern Ohio and lower that state. When I went to school there, there were like Tim Hortons everywhere. I do miss Tim Hortons.
Yeah.
I don't think I can eat anything there anymore, but
no. Yeah. So that was fun. That was an interesting like weekend. I would do that again. The drive wasn't terrible.
I went to 2 baseball games and haven't been sleeping and have been having stress breakdowns about school, and I broke someone's car. I broke my car.
Would you say you broke your car or the Ohio
a giant
infrastructure
pothole on 271 North broke my car?
I would say that's on Ohio.
And then the real salt in the wound is that within 2 days they had filled the pothole.
No.
Yeah. So I was super close to not having had to pay $200 for a new rim, but I'm just not meant to have a good life.
That makes me so... I get so like giddy when all of us Midwesterners get like, that's to me like peak Midwestern culture is like how irate and like at the same time the out of body experience you have when you go over a pothole and you hit it and you're like, oh, and your soul leaves your body.
I felt like the reverb of it, and like I knew in my heart of hearts that it was bad, but then I didn't notice anything different while I was driving, and it was like over an hour drive, and I get to work and I'm like, hey, maybe things are looking up for Britta.
With your Mary Tyler Moore hat. Like,
I throw my beret up. And then like I missed like the bird swooping down and grabbing it, and then like a bigger bird eating that bird, and then like, I don't know, a giant fish leaping out of Lake Erie and eating that bird. So I came out of work that night and my tire was just completely flat. And I was like, oh, of course. And I like went over and I put air in it, and it's like supposed to be at like 35 for the tire pressure, and it was at 10.
It's like, why are you even trying?
Yeah. And so I drove home and I parked my car and I got out. And as soon as I got out of my car, I just heard the like,
for all of you ASMR girlies,
of the air coming out of my tire. And I went, oh no. And I just went through this. Like, I just got a different tire fixed because and it turned out to be a bent rim. So I was like, well, maybe it's just my rim and they can just hammer it back. And I like looked at it and I was like, oh, that rim looks terrible. It's definitely at least that.
Oh no.
But they couldn't just hammer it back in. Like, I had to replace it. The tire was fine, but it was still a lot. And of course I had like a huge project and I had to get to campus, and my school is like a super long drive away from where I live, and I had to figure out how I was going to get there without my car. And then when somebody took me to pick up my car, I slammed their door into my open door and cracked like part of the paneling around the window, and just immediately burst into tears about it.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. I talked to them about what you said I should talk to them about their podcast nickname.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't think they care if it changes, but also like it's kind of a good nickname already.
It's kind of a great nickname, and I feel like our viewers at this point we're too deep.
I know. It's a deep cut.
So, anyways, we're surviving. We're here. We're
barely surviving.
I feel like every time we have like a long break, it's not when we regularly are together. It's like when we have weeks apart, the wildest things seem to happen.
Beth, are you asking me to move in with you? Yes, 1,000 times yes. This will be my room here in the basement. Get out of the closet, James Willis. Slender Man, you're going to have to move out of the ghoul door because I'm going to bring my cat.
Oh, God.
You can never come down here again.
I would just find every book and every like collectible we have down here on the floor all the time.
It would probably be like perfectly fine, except for like one small space in the wrestling action figures where he would like insert himself porcelain cat style, and you'd just come down and see like a cat in the middle of all of them with giant bug eyes. Slender Man could just pick him up and stick him in there. He's got a long reach.
Yeah.
And then he could leave.
God. My tater tot does like kitty cats. It says kitty.
Aww.
But yeah, it's been, as I was told the other day, we're not supposed to say may you live in interesting times, because apparently that was like an insult in like Chinese culture.
Oh.
But that's what I feel like has been happening.
I don't want to live in interesting times. I want to live in normal times.
Yes, I do want to just live in normal
I would
times.
very much like to know what an unstressed life feels like.
I wouldn't know it yet. Anyways, welcome to the Lake Erie Library.
God, as this goes on, like, I don't know what episode this is, but it just gets more and more like, I don't want to say nihilistic, but like every episode is just like, Jesus effing Christ. Anyway, let's talk about some stuff.
this one, the thing we're talking about today is very interesting to me because it is fairly recent.
It is fairly recent.
And like Lake Erie library history and just like Ohio history. It's fairly recent. It's I would say it's the most recent true crime thing we are going to be discussing.
I think so. At this point, it's probably the most recent.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have in a couple episodes from now, we are going to talk about a true crime thing that happened a few years before this in a different part of Ohio. But
yes, and so I was like reading on this stuff today, and I was like, man, this happened in 2016. Where was I mentally in 2016? And I'm like, well, I was at the library.
Do you remember this? I do remember seeing like news coverage of it, but like not paying a lot of attention to it because it's pretty far away from where we are in Ohio. But
I don't remember this, but there was a lot happening, I think, to me personally when this was happening. I think this was there was a lot happening to me personally. Like I had other stuff on my mind, so this was just like. And then I'm like, how did I miss all this? Wow, wild from start to finish. So yeah, I don't really remember this, but I was just like, what was I doing in 2016?
Yeah, I vaguely remember it. I remember like peripherally like catching news stories about it and being like, wow, that's really sad and also totally bonkers. But then recently a documentary about it went up.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched it and went, oh yes, okay, connecting the dots. I remember this happening. So that's what made me say, hey Beth, we're doing an episode on this. So
I will say to all of you dear listeners, me and Britta were working together at the time because we've known each other for a decade.
Yeah.
So this was early in the this would have been, would this been our jogging season? I think it was the beginning of our jogging season.
It might have been, yeah. Because I'd been there for about 2 years at that point.
Yeah, I think that, yeah. This was the summer I dedicated all of my running to WWE entertainers and jogged my little heart out and sweated a lot. It was the summer. That's probably why I didn't pay attention to the news. I was too busy sweating.
I'm sorry, I'm too busy naming every tree as I run past it.
No,
I can't watch the news.
Naming sharks too.
I remember that, yes.
God, I named so many sharks.
It was like that scene in Forrest Gump with Bubba when he just keeps listing ways to cook shrimp. But Beth, in like 80s day glow and a like one-shouldered t-shirt that she had cut the neck out of.
Yep.
Jogging in the woods with me, going tiger shark, lemon shark, whale shark.
Yep. And once you get past like those like kind of big ones that everyone knows, then I'm like name dropping the oddball ones. I'm like epaulet shark, dogfish, all sorts of sharks.
Okay,
it's so nerdy. Anyways, so today we have a topic that I would say is a tragic story. It is a wild story, and I have a lot of questions that I don't think I'll ever get the answers to.
Yeah.
I think that's in a nutshell. That's what I would say.
I've heard several people refer to this as one of, if not the worst murder cases in Ohio history.
As well as one of the largest investigations in Ohio history.
So we are going to talk about the Rhoden family murders, or more commonly known as the Pike County Massacre or Pike County shootings, because it happened in Pike County. It was very close to the village of Peebles, which is about 50 miles outside of Columbus, and about 60 miles away from Cincinnati. So it's like kind of that midpoint between the lower seas.
Yeah, and it's more southern Ohio. It's Appalachian. At the time, at the 2010 census, 820 like families or households lived there.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, this happening here, it's like such a quiet, rural, like small town community, very small town community.
Right.
Like this shook them to their core.
Yeah, nothing like this had ever happened there before. And if you do watch the documentary about it that's on Paramount, a family member of this family, he was sort of just talking about the town in terms of like, well, you know, it is like Appalachia. Like this is the kind of place where if you're struggling, you just ask someone, like someone's always going to help you. He's like, if you didn't have a place to stay or you couldn't find a meal, like there's always someone who's going to like help you with that.
Mm-hmm.
And a reporter for the local newspaper was also quoted in there, and she was like, we're the type of place where it's like if you're having a hard day and you stop someone and tell them, like, you just be like, hey, like, can you say a prayer for me? They're gonna stop right then and they're gonna like do exactly that.
They're gonna say a prayer for
exactly.
you.
So this is, you know, it is kind of like a quieter, sleepier little town where nobody suspected something this horrific would happen.
And it's actually funny. I mean, it's not funny, but I don't know if you planned this or not, but like the day we are recording is the anniversary of like when they suspect the murders occurred.
Yeah,
so.
April 21st into April 22nd of 2016 is when this happened. We are recording today on the 21st.
This was premeditated.
It was some I mean it just sort of worked out. I don't want to say fortuitously, but once it came back on my radar, we were planning what episodes we were going to record to air in April. And so I think we had planned.
We did have to switch out stuff because
I think we had planned for it to go up today
right.
rather than record today, but
right.
still. So, okay, let's just, I guess, get into it. We're kind of tiptoeing around it because it's awful, but the morning of April 22nd, 2016, and
there is, before I
yeah,
do want to
ahead.
preface, there is, so there were 8 people murdered in what we are telling you, and this is a very large cast of characters. So I think once we put this up, hopefully we can put up some like pictures with like names so that you can kind of connect the dots of who's who, because I remember the first time I was like reading through this, I was like, wait.
Some of the family members have like very similar names as well. So it was April 22nd in the morning, and Bobby Jo Manley, she went to her brother-in-law Chris's property. She would often start her day by going there to help take care of the animals. They had dogs and like chickens, and she went up to his trailer and the door was locked, which was not the usual. And when she finally made her way inside, she found blood everywhere. She also found Chris, who was 40 at the time, and Gary Rhoden dead.
Gary's Chris's cousin, I believe. And
so
when she called, she was like,
Gary is Chris's cousin, yes.
She told the dispatcher, like, the house is full of blood. She was very like distraught.
They do play a portion of the 911 calls, and the way she phrases it is that she says, I think my brother-in-law is dead. I found him and his cousin, and somebody beat the shit out of them. So the way she found them, it was not pretty. It was very messy. They had both been shot in the head, execution style. The 911 dispatch told her to go wait outside until the deputy could come and meet her there. So she did, and it's really heartbreaking because you just like hear like how distraught she is. And then she went over to check on Frankie Rhoden, who was one of Chris's sons.
Yes.
And his girlfriend, Hannah. So Frankie's first name is Clarence, but he went by Frankie. He was 20 years old. His girlfriend, Hannah Gilly, was also 20 years old. And this was within walking distance of...
They live in mobile homes, which I feel like is important to note, because they live in this like acreage, I'm assuming, but they have multiple mobile homes on top of the acreage. So that was how they're able to have land, but also be very close together.
Yes. So she walked over to check on him, obviously, because she had just found his father, and she knocked on the door, and Frankie's 3-year-old son came to the door, and she asked where he was, and he said, "Daddy's playing zombie in the bedroom," which is just the saddest thing.
Yes.
So she went into the bedroom, and she found both Frankie and Hannah in the bed. They had also been shot in the head, execution style, and their 6-month-old baby was alive in the bed, playing between them, covered in their blood. Which is what fucking monsters.
Yes.
To do this in the first place, but to also, I mean, thank God that these children are alive, but to leave them like that with their parents.
Yes.
So at this point, the sheriff has gotten involved. The deputies are there. The news is starting to get out. News vans from all over are starting to flood the streets of this town. Everyone is like, what is going on? Police went to a third location, which is Dana Rhoden's home. Dana and Chris Sr. were married. Dana was 37.
So they were exes at this point. And this was, to give you a timeline, so this was 7:51 a.m. was when the first phone call was made, and then 1:26 p.m. was I'm getting ahead of myself. So in between 8 and 1, the third residence was checked up on.
And this is like about a mile away from the other two locations. So when police arrived to do this like wellness check on her, they also found Dana in the rear bedroom. She had been shot in the head 5 times. They found her son, Chris Jr., in his bed down the hall with 4 gunshot wounds to his head. He was only 16 years old. And then in the last bedroom down the hall, her daughter, Hannah, who was 19, was also found dead in her bed with 2 gunshot wounds to her head. And she had just given birth earlier that week, like 4 days earlier, and her baby was also alive in the bed next to her.
Laying in the bed next to her.
I know. It's just like heartbreaking. Hannah did also have a 2-year-old daughter, but she was not there that night.
No.
And then the last victim in this.
So this was at 1:26 p.m. A 911 call was reported where an adult male in the nearby village of Piketon was found, and that was there's so many of them. God, that's terrible. That would have been Kenneth. So Kenneth was the brother of Chris Rhoden Sr., and he also died to a single gunshot wound to the head.
And this is where it's so hard to find sensitive terminology to discuss this, but how they found Kenneth is what sort of sets off even more of a red flag in this situation, because while everyone was found shot, they referred to it as execution style in the head. Most of them were single gunshot wounds. Some of them suffered more. Kenneth suffered 1. It was to his eye, and there were dollar bills spread all over his body.
Yes.
None of the other victims were found that way.
And when they did like there wasn't any like hard DNA found at the scene. There wasn't any like hair or gloves or murder weapons left. The only thing police found were 2 shoe prints. And they were of 2, which is very odd to me, 2 left feet of different sizes. So 2 left shoe prints of different shoe styles and different sizes were found at the crime scenes. And that's it. That is what they had for physical evidence. But they were like, well, if it's 2 different ones, it's 2 different killers. But they didn't find any other than like the money. There wasn't anything overly where they're like, this is clearly this, and this happened, other than like they first were like, well, maybe it's a murder-suicide. And they're like, no, there's no evidence of suicide whatsoever.
And you would also wonder why, if it was a murder-suicide situation, why were the young children also not killed? I mean, I keep saying, like, with a grain of salt, like, thank God they were not. But it sort of makes that theory hard to believe. So,
right. And they also were murdered with multiple murder weapons.
I was just gonna say that there were 3 weapons used in the shootings. There was an SKS semi-automatic rifle, a 40 caliber Glock 22, which it's a semi-automatic, and then a Walter Colt 22 caliber pistol. So 3 different weapons were used in this in 4 locations, all on the same night, all members of the same family, and then one of them is found with dollar bills sprinkled over his body, which, you know, maybe it is due to like pop culture and like films and things like that. Or maybe it is just, you know, maybe this is like a thing that happens. But this made the first thought of police and investigation. They immediately were like, oh, is this somehow tied to drugs?
Yes, that was their first thought. They did also find, upon further searching the property, I think at Kenneth's house first, they did find him smalling. Jesus, they... growing a small amount of marijuana, which, you know, now in the year of our Lord 2024, in the state of Ohio, it is legal to grow your own marijuana. But this was 2016. That was a huge no-no back then. But they also have found in rural Appalachia, that's where they grow the most.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
I'm like,
it used to be moonshine, now it's weed.
I'm like, you want to grow something that makes actually decent money? I get it.
I mean, it's not Appalachia, but watch Ozark. The other thing, and this is like, maybe I just need to like break the tension here a little bit. The thing that made me like every time gave me pause when researching this is it kept referring to the Attorney General, Mike DeWine, and I'm like, he's our governor. Why do you keep calling? I'm like, oh, because this was years ago. This was before he was governor.
God. I was like, oh, you were involved in this too?
Right. How many worms did you eat out of your pocket that day, Mike?
Oh my God.
I'm convinced that he is like some sort of ghoul who eats worms out of his like suit jacket pocket when no one's looking.
Stop it.
I hope you hear this, Mike DeWine. Also, watching this documentary, if that's your house, you make entirely too much money. It looks like you live in a castle.
Oh.
People are dying, Kim. So, they very quickly got the FBI and the Ohio Bureau of Investigation involved in this because it was clear that there was more to this than just something like a simple local deputy's office could handle.
Right.
Which again, as we said, it turned out to be one of the most massive investigations in Ohio history. And originally the coroner's office said they were not going to ever release like autopsy reports for this.
Right. And then the Cincinnati Inquirer
The rural juror.
And the Columbus Dispatch sued the state of Ohio and like they sued them and were like, you can't do that because it's public record, so like you have to release that information.
Yep.
Wild that they sued them, but I like kind of love it because I'm like, that's right, that's the issue we should have with this, is like journalistic integrity, not like.
So I kind of understand though, like
I do understand both sides of it, because they're like, if we release this,
it's an ongoing investigation.
It's an ongoing investigation. People could lie. People can withhold evidence, etc., etc. Like, that's why they didn't want to release it at first.
Yes, and there is this phenomenon of people, when something terrible happens, like, they somehow want to tie themselves to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it's like that Dane Cook.
Oh.
Where were you when the accident happened? I was washing a dish. I was washing a dish and I heard it and I came outside. I didn't even put my shoes on. Like, it's that kind of thing. So they also don't. It is easier for them to weed out fake tips or fake information about this if that information is not released publicly.
Right.
So I do understand, but also, like, it does make you seem super shady.
Yes, on both accounts.
So, remember this happened at some point between the evening of April 21st and the morning of April 22nd when they were found. On April 28th, Gary Rhoden was the first of the victims to be buried. He was buried in South Shore, Kentucky. Hannah Gilley, who was Frankie's girlfriend, I think.
They're both named Hannah, which is
there's
an issue.
There's a
like,
girlfriend Hannah and a sister Hannah, and
yes.
Girlfriend Hannah is Hannah with an H, and sister Hannah is Hanna.
Yes, Hannah with an H is his fiance,
Chris Jr.'s.
Frankie's.
So Hannah Gilley was the next to be buried on May 1st. And then the remaining funerals happened on May 3rd. And this is probably because of the ongoing autopsies as well. Plus, you had a whole family that kind of went in one go. So
the state of Ohio did pay for it.
I was going to say, like, who is left to organize that? But, your distant cousins and things like that. So, I'm trying to remember if he's Kenneth or Gary's. I think Gary's brother is interviewed in the documentary as well, and so I mean, like, it's him, maybe, you know, so that those things take some time. So that's understandable that it happened somewhat later than the rest.
And then the state of Ohio provided $20,000 with like assistance to bury everybody, which is, I thought, pretty nice.
I think it's also kind of interesting that there was the guy who owns Jeff Ruby Steaks in Cincinnati offered a reward of $25,000 for any info that led to the arrest and conviction of anyone in the shootings.
Like, buddy, what did you have at stake? Like, no pun intended. Like, what did you have at stake that you were like, I'm gonna put up this money? This is like, were you just so invested and like felt compelled?
Maybe, but then later he withdrew it, being like, I don't actually want to be like associated with this on Twitter. And then the Southern Ohio Crime Stoppers Fund authorized a reward of $10,000, but they didn't announce this until, so they were like, all right, like, we'll give $10,000 if anybody can give you any info that leads to an arrest on May 10th. But the authorities didn't tell anyone until July 21st because they said it was a miscommunication and misunderstanding about public notification.
I think they just didn't want to be bombarded with a bunch of tips.
Yeah.
And wade through that.
For sure. So moving into the investigation, like I said, the FBI and BCI got involved like very quickly, and they didn't come in and overstep. Like, the sheriff's department asked them to come in and work on this.
Well, I can't imagine, like, I know where we live, we have a sheriff's department, and I can't imagine, and we are much denser than Pike County. And I cannot imagine, like, something happening of this caliber and, like, any sheriff's department being like, yeah, I'm equipped to handle this.
Mm-hmm. So, as Beth said before, at first they considered it being a murder-suicide, but there were some things that didn't quite track with that. Most amongst them, the fact that none of them seemed to have ended their own life. So police quickly believed that there was more than one person doing this. And that does make sense. I mean, you have 3 of your locations are within walking distance of each other. 2 are very close. 1's a mile away. So that's, if you're a fast walker, that's like maybe a 15-minute walk.
Right.
But if you were that close on a property and it was one person doing it, would you not hear gunshots from like the closer your family's house and go to check on them? So it would make sense that there would be at least 2, if not more. And then you have another location that's 8 miles away. Right. Which makes your timeline much harder to meet if it's only one person. Right. And then there's the whole 2 left shoe print thing.
There's 2 left shoes. They also found on the outside of Chris Sr.'s trailer bullet holes pocking the outside of it. And they also, upon further investigation, Chris Sr. had dogs. That's what Bobby Joe went to go feed, was the dog. So when you live, and not even when you live in rural places, but when you live in places with the dog, if the dog is familiar with somebody, they're like not going to, bark as much. But if the dog is like a stranger, like my dog sees anybody that he finds a threat and is like, I'm gonna bark my head off at this person. As opposed to like if Britta comes over my house and not barking, but like, here, let me show you this toy that I'm not gonna let you take. Right. I just want to show you this toy.
No take, only throw. There was also just like there really was no other forensic evidence. There were really no other tracks too. So this was clearly a premeditated situation. And they were like, this is pretty sophisticated. This is not just someone like deciding in the middle of the night to go, kill someone for some quick cash. Like this was planned, and this was planned extensively.
They also found on further investigation, I think it was Chris Sr. on his property had a like greenhouse of marijuana growing. So then they're like, well, if it's drugs, maybe it's with the drug cartel. And then they found with the chickens that they're like, these chickens are specifically bred for cockfighting. And I'm like, wait, what?
Right.
And now you're like, well, wait a minute. So first, when you first read this, you're like, this is a family massacre. This is awful. And point blank, I still think this is like awful.
It is awful.
You killed all of these people. You killed these mothers in cold blood, and you put their children right next to their dead bodies.
Yeah.
I'm just like, go and rot in jail, or like just go.
Yeah.
You're, like, that is to
monsters.
Me, yes, one of the worst things you can do. And like, then so you have this like, they're just minding their own business. This is a small town, like they're not bad people. But then you have this like, well, they're growing marijuana. And obviously here on the Lake Erie Library, I'm like, smoke it if you got it. It does not bother me.
Right. But these plants that were being grown were, it was a lot. It was like 200 cannabis plants. It did not seem like this was like, I'm growing my own supply to just like veg out and chill. It was more indicative of selling it.
I am enterprising.
Yes, which is why they started to consider involvement of a Mexican drug cartel. And this is not that out of place. In Pike County in 2010, 22,000 cannabis plants were seized by authorities. So this is like 6 years earlier. 22,000 plants in 1 year. And this is like maybe like 15 miles within a 15-mile radius. There was a huge cannabis grow site that was discovered in 2012 with 1,200 cannabis plants, which were destroyed. And in both of those cases, the police thought it was a Mexican drug cartel.
Do they count? I know how cannabis grows. I've seen the plants. I feel like I have to disclaim that, like, not in real life, guys, only in movies, but I've seen the plants.
She threw a blanket over the table and her grow lamps that are right behind her. And she thinks I don't know, but I know.
Do they count when they're like, we collected 22,000?
I think it's individual
Do they
plants.
go like, okay, 1 plant, 2 plant,
yes,
3 good God. And then what do they do with all the cannabis? Do they just burn
destroy it?
They don't burn
I don't think they burn it, Beth, but they destroy it. I mean, you cut them to die. You don't let them dry out. You get rid of the remains. Like,
oh God,
this is gonna get me on like a list where later I'm like, how do they destroy seized cannabis plants? And like I Google it, and then all of a sudden I'm on a watch list. So yeah,
God, can you imagine being that worker in the criminal investigation unit where you have to like label each plant that you've like seized and you're counting them and you're like, wait, what am I at now? 2,400.
I just find it really hard to believe that some of them didn't take a plant home. Like, you cannot tell me that you didn't at least propagate that and take a stem home and like hide it on the wall behind your succulents and grow a little bit of it for yourself. This is also what I assume happens when they seize cocaine. I'm like, there's no way you guys aren't taking a bump off of that in the evidence room.
Well, that video we watched of the cocaine avocados, that cocaine was, they were not that like careful with it. It was like a little cloud around the avocado. You telling me they didn't breathe that in? They weren't wearing they could have been wearing a mask, but I don't know how like filtered those masks are.
Yeah.
Anyways, sorry to get excited.
I just
drugs.
see corruption everywhere. Maybe I'm Batman and I'm just like, oh, the city's dirty.
Or Rorschach.
Rorschach, yeah. Who watched The Watchmen? On May 3rd, so after the last 6 victims were buried, they towed away 3 vehicles from the properties. This was as part of the investigation, and then they came back the next day and towed additional vehicles. And as of May 12th, more than 500 tips had been submitted and 128 interviews were conducted on this.
I don't know why they had so many vehicles, but I was like, to be fair, it's 8 like,
and it's
adults.
Rural too.
Yes.
So you probably have like,
you got your work truck, you got your normal minivan-esque car, you got your driving far, good on gas car.
Right. So I'm trying to find the thing about how many. So 50 people had been interviewed in connection with the killings. 79 pieces of evidence were examined, including a Facebook threat aimed at Chris Jr., which was posted before the shootings. All of these vehicles are towed.
And the mobile homes themselves were also towed, which there are pictures of it online because I was trying to picture how that was. And they have them literally on giant flatbed trucks with like the windows and doors boarded up.
That's actually really smart though. Like, if it is a trailer and it is a mobile home and you can do that, like, what better way to preserve evidence?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not having to have people come in, like forensics don't have to come in and like carefully remove and possibly destroy some of it. Like, you can literally just take all of the evidence as is to a different location to investigate.
But then that was another point of contention, is that so the authorities they had it essentially in like a giant warehouse, but then there was like an investigative team who was looking at the warehouse and they said, you don't have this like tightly secured. And Mike DeWine's like, no, that's ridiculous. Of course it's tightly secured. And they literally had video footage of it like being unlocked at night. And so they were like,
it had been previously owned by a chemical processing company, so it's not like a sterile environment.
No. So they were just like, how accurate can any of the physical evidence you garner from this place be? So there was like a point of contention with it. But again, as we said, there wasn't, beyond what we are learning about the victims, there was not a lot of evidence that would have connected any direct person to the murders.
Correct. So moving forward to August of 2016, there was a court hearing for custody of the 2 infants, which is the 6-month-old who was Hannah and Frankie's younger child, and Hannah, the sister's 4-day-old daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's during that custody hearing is when the sheriff first confirmed their suspicions that there was more than one shooter involved. And he also said that the 2 children were in danger because the investigation was still ongoing. Like, they don't know who killed their parents. They warned the rest of their relatives that lived around there that they might also be targets, and to, keep that in mind. And they warned the entire city, like, it kind of went on lockdown. Like, don't leave your house because we don't entirely know what motivated this.
Right. I mean, especially if I was just thinking too, I'm like, that's 8 people. You guys were just minding your own business. Like, you're in your homes. This is very family style, like, mom living with teenage daughter, and, like, very, like, these are families. Like, these are families just living their lives, like, with their kids and stuff and trying to make ends meet, and they were just murdered. Like, just gone like that.
August 23rd, about 100 miles away in Kenton County, Kentucky, there was a double homicide in Kenton that had happened 2 weeks prior to the shooting. So on August 23rd, the officials there reported the similarities between this. The victims had been a well-known drug dealer and his girlfriend, who were both found shot execution style in their bed. At that point, they still had not caught the killers from Kenton County, but they believed that they were familiar with the victims' homes. They left the children in the house unharmed. And this is, it's sounding similar to this, to what's going on. And investigators in Ohio had already determined that, like, these people had to have been murdered by someone who was familiar with both them and their properties.
Right.
Because how else would you know all of these members of a family, like, where they were located? Like, sure, the ones that are on the same property, but what about the one that's a mile away? What about the one that's 8 miles away?
Right. And the fact that, like, they had animals and stuff, and nothing was, like, the dogs didn't break loose. They didn't, there was no, like, I very much feel like if there was a stranger in our house and, like, they had malicious intent, that my dog would be trying to bite a chunk out of them. Mm-hmm. And nothing like that occurred.
Yeah. So the following year, on May 12th, 2017, a SWAT team from Franklin County raided a Pike County home approximately 10 miles from the site of the murders. The police originally said they were searching for suspects in the murders, but it was later clarified that they were looking for evidence, not suspects. They had already kind of figured out who this was. Mm-hmm. They had also searched an Adams County property that was owned and recently sold by Edward Jake Wagner, who was Hannah Rhoden's ex-boyfriend and the father of her 3-year-old daughter, who had not been at the home the night of the shootings. He was not the father of her 4-day-old daughter who was with her.
She was living with, like, she had a boyfriend, and the boyfriend was, because he got but I'm like, was he the father of the child?
Well, so this is not
the 4-day-old, not the 3-year-old.
Well, that boyfriend didn't live with them.
Gotcha. Okay.
Are you thinking of the other Hannah Gilley? Hannah Gilley lived with her fiance Frankie.
Right.
This is Hannah Rhoden, who lived with her mom and her brother.
Right. Gotcha.
But she had a baby who she had just had 4 days earlier.
Right.
I guess the gross thing about, I mean, a lot of it's gross, but the super gross thing to me about this is that when Hannah and Jake were dating, she was only 13 years old when they started a sexual relationship.
And he was 17.
Yeah.
And then she had a baby by the age of 15.
Yes.
Yeah. I felt the same way.
Right. So that was in May when the SWAT team raided the houses. In June, late June of that year, police announced that they were seeking additional information on Jake as well as his parents, Billy and Angela. At that time, the family was living in Alaska.
I'm not laughing at it. Just like when I was reading this and I was like looking and I'm like, of all the places to live at. Now, they did say when they talked to them about living in Alaska, somebody came out and said, like a relative of theirs, like, oh, well, they were planning on moving there prior to all of this happening.
Which is true. They had talked about it. Billy had kind of had this like obsession with it, but there were no plans set of like, yes, we're moving at this time on this day.
Mm-hmm.
It was like something they had talked about, but no steps were taken to make it happen until all of a sudden
8 people died.
8 people die, one of whom is the mother of your grandchild, and all of a sudden you pack up and move to Alaska.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On November 13th of 2018, they announced that Billy Wagner, whose first name was George, Angela Wagner, and their sons, Jake and George, had been arrested and charged with planning and carrying out the murders. And the suspects were all members of the Wagner Newcomb family from South Webster. So George, the elder, Billy, was 47. Angela was 48. George, the younger, was 27. And Jake was 26. So Jake and George, the younger, were arrested during a traffic stop. Like, they got pulled over by cops and got taken in. Angela was arrested at her home outside of Columbus. And then Billy Wagner was arrested in Lexington, Kentucky.
I will also say, so 2 of them prior to getting arrested, police had been, like, they had the SWAT team raid their house, but gathering evidence, but police also started tapping, like, everything in the family. Like, they went so far as when Jake and his brother, like, started a new job at a trucking company, they had the company agree that to let them put bugs on the cars to track where they were going, as well as like tapping their phones. And they did get evidence of the mother, Angela, saying we're like running out of time.
Yup.
Which, out of context, real sus. Real sus. And yeah, it months of like gathering this information until they make these arrests finally. And then upon making these arrests, they were all arrested, and I think like essentially they wanted to try for the death penalty for all of them, for this murder of this family.
Yes. George, Jake, Angela, and Billy were all indicted on capital murder charges in November of 2018. George was convicted in late 2022 and found guilty on all charges, but he essentially took a deal to essentially save his own life.
I reading this and thinking about our Irish Danny Green discussion about how, like, you don't turn in the family, you don't turn your back. And I was like, man, this family, once they got like arrested, they're like, yeah, no, I'm gonna sing like a canary.
Right. Well, his brother and his mom testified against him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, at that point, I'd be like, fine, rot. Jake and Angela both pleaded guilty to their roles in the slayings in 2021, and their testimonies were part of their plea deals with their prosecutors. So George, the death penalty was just like out. Like he was just gonna spend life in prison. And then Billy is still fighting the charges. He's supposed to have a trial this year.
Yes, he pleaded not guilty, and he was like, and they're just now waiting till, which it's so frustrating. I understand things take time, but it is so frustrating on multiple accounts that, like, I think it was Billy, he didn't want a right to a speedy trial, so, like, I think that's why everything's being stretched out, but I'm just like, why? Like, you were costing taxpayers money by, like, kind of sitting in this holding, like, of, like, I'm arrested, but I'm not fully in jail, and what are we doing? Why? This is so long after this has happened now. Mm-hmm. What are we doing? This is 8 years. That's wild. And also, from the time they were free, basically 2 years until after the murder occurred. That's also wild to me.
Yes. So, investigators said that the Wagner family, who had been longtime friends of the Rhodens, were essentially caught up in a custody dispute over Hannah and Jake's daughter.
So I will tell you a thing, because I looked it up.
Mm-hmm.
And this is for you, dear listeners. If you are not married in the state of Ohio, automatically, upon the birth of your child, as an unmarried couple, the mother gets automatic custody. Full stop. That's it. So if there is a custody battle, the father of the child, even if they're a good dad, but the father of that child has to go to court and prove that they are a good dad to the court of law in order to gain any parental rights. Now, if you're married, upon birth of the baby, both of you have equal parental rights over the child. But if you're not married, dad doesn't get any rights, mom gets all the rights. And I think they do this because I'm assuming it's to curb how we deal with child payments and stuff, like child support.
I'm sure that's part of it.
Because I know that there's a lot of issues with funds.
Yes, I think it's also probably maybe a small amount of this. And, you know, if you work in this sector, maybe you can correct me. But I do think that there is also instances of, primarily in like relationships with domestic abuse,
yes,
where a father figure will withhold children as a means of trapping domestic abuse survivors in that relationship. And so I think that this also helps to sort of curb the odds of that being able to happen, because at least then the survivors have a legal leg to stand on that can help them get out of that situation.
Yes, 100%. So the thing I couldn't find, and it didn't come out, was what type of relationship they had. At first it sounded like when it was first being investigated and when they were talking to the Wagner family, they're like, oh no, like they had an agreement. It was fine. There was no contention between the two of them. So the Wagner family lied under this investigation, and they straight up just lied about this relationship that Hannah and Jake had with their daughter.
Yes.
Which is also, I'm like, so creepy on multiple levels. So I'm like, Jake, not only are you significantly older than your ex-girlfriend, she was 13 on your 17. Mm-hmm. Ew. But you guys get out of this relationship. She's still so young. And she is pregnant again. And then you're fighting for custody. Why? Like, are you truly that good of a dad? Are you like, why should you have any type of parental rights over your daughter?
Right. And so there had been a custody document that had been, I don't want to say forged, but there was a custody document that was drafted 19 days before the murders that stated that the Wagners had tried to get Hannah to sign her parental rights over to Jake and that she wouldn't do it. So they're like covering their tracks of like, well, we we tried to go about this the legal way, but she's the one being difficult. And it is alleged that Rita Newcomb, who is Angela's mother, so his grandmother, is the one who forged that custody document. So she was actually indicted on 3 counts of forgery, 1 count of obstructing justice, and 1 count of perjury. And then Frederica Wagner, who's Billy's mother, was indicted on 1 count of obstructing justice and 1 count of perjury. So both grandmas were indicted because they lied to a grand jury.
How?
Yeah. So charges were eventually dropped against Frederica. Like we said, like, this is still not fully put to rest. Like, there's still people who need to be put on trial for this. The people who have kind of seen an ending to this were really only because they took a plea deal.
Right.
So,
and Jake, I mean, Jake essentially took the fall for the rest of his family and took a plea deal and talking about the rest of his family of, like, he did do the shootings, but he only did 5 of the 8 shootings. So he is not getting the death penalty, but he has, like, I think it's 8 consecutive life sentences. He'll die in jail. It's like 8 life sentences, I think. So he's in prison for the rest of his life. And I just can't, I'm like, okay, so you did 5 of the, who did the other 3? Nobody's been convicted, which I guess, to be fair, we have 1 more trial to go through. This is an active case, technically. Like, Billy could go on trial and we could find out.
right.
But I guess.
So for legal reasons, allegedly,
Allegedly. But
we've covered everything, allegedly.
But my questions of this investigation is, why all 8 family members? Like, why all of them? Like, will we ever get, I guess that's not, I don't need that closure. That's not, they're not related to me that I know of. So
right. And I do recommend watching the documentary because you do get to hear from, like, the Rhoden family's family members, particularly, like, Gary's brother. He talks about how he just kind of was always, like, he couldn't really find his place in life and he couldn't find his way, and it seemed like he had finally found it working construction with Chris Sr., and that he was, like, he'd, like, had a purpose and he was, like, happy with what he was doing, and so his brother was, like, really happy for him. And he says, like, Chris Sr. was, like, the kind of guy, like, he's like, he was quiet, he didn't say much, but when he said something, like, it was meaningful, and he was constantly the kind of person who would, like, give you the shirt off his back. Like, he was such a giving guy, and so, like, him taking Gary under his wing, like come on, man, like, we're gonna find you, like, a purpose in life, come work construction with me. He, like, it was just, he had, like, nice things to say about his family, and it was really, it's sad to watch him because he does get, like, a little choked up, and he's just like, I'm done for today. Which then, maybe because it is such a, like, somber moment, he's, like, on an ATV and he, like, backs it up and drives away. And I was like, I only want to make entrances and exits on an ATV from now. Like, give me a 4-wheeler and let me drop some profound stuff like that, and then just, like, wheel away into the night. I do want to talk a little bit before we, like, fully, like, move into the end of things.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the kids. Like, the young children who were impacted by this. So you have Brentley Rhoden, who is the son of Frankie. So he's the one that came and answered the door. He testified at the trial.
Oh my God.
I think he was, like, 11 at that time, maybe. But he testified for prosecutors, and his mom, like, shared, like, what he said after what's his name, which Wagner was found guilty.
Jake.
So after Jake was found guilty on all 22 counts, just before the judge in the case sentenced him, Brentley had written a victim impact statement. His mom read it, and he said, "I've been scared since that night, knowing bad guys came into my house while I was sleeping. I'm always scared now that I'll lose my mommy. And so he was like, he's like 10 or 11 during
it's
that.
fine. I'm not going to cry
so
on this
sad.
podcast.
And he addressed Jake directly, and he said, "You did that to me," in his victim impact statement. So he was 3 when this happened. And he'd been sleeping in the living room, and he opened the front door when Bobby Joe came to the door.
Right.
And then there's also Rhoden, who
is it the 6-month-old?
He's yes, he's now 8. He was 6 months old, and he was the one that was in the bed with them. Hannah Gillies' mother, Andrea Shoemaker, she like made it like a very important thing that he is like still like she's still in his life.
Aww.
And she said, "My grandson was made an orphan in one night. I see the pain in Ruger's eyes. He mourns for his dad so bad, and that's something he'll have to do for the rest of his life, want his daddy." I know, it's so sad, but I think it is important because these are survivors of this as well. So Kylie Rhoden is 7.5 now. She was only 4 days old when her mom Hannah was murdered. God, that's so sad. Like she was like nursing the baby in bed when this happened to her. Kylie yearns for her mom. So Andrea said, "I watch your baby girl Kylie mourn to know who her mommy was. I answer questions that shouldn't have never had to have been asked in the first place." And then outside of the Rhoden family, you also have Bullvine Wagner, who is, I keep getting their names mixed up. He's not Jake. He's Jake's nephew.
Okay.
So he was living with his mom while his dad was on trial, but he had been living with like all of them until they were arrested in November. So he's 10 now. At the trial, a brother of the victim said the Rhodens invited him to their Christmas gathering at their home in 2018. And during this, he said that they all got a present, even though like none of them were related to the Rhodens. So like this family was just like, yeah, like you're Jake's family, come to Christmas. Like absolutely, all the kids are gonna get presents. Like come on up. Like that's they quoted, it says, "True love, that's what was showed that Christmas dinner," Tony Rhoden said of his mother Geneva. "It was embedded by our mom to all her kids." And then there's Sophia Wagner, who she was the one that they were fighting custody over. Yes. And it has been insinuated both by Mike DeWine, who was the prosecutor at the time, attorney general at the time, and then the lead prosecutor, that this whole scheme was essentially concocted in cold blood to guarantee custody for Jake with Sophia, which maybe that is true. Maybe that's true. But to me, I'm like, this feels like more than that, because I'm like, why would you murder everybody? Why wouldn't you just murder Hannah? Like, and I'm not trying to say that because I want somebody murdered, but I'm just like, that doesn't make sense to me. None of it makes any sense. No, I mean, I guess that's why we talk about these things. But they came out and said that, and then they said that like Angela was a terrible mother because as a mother you were supposed to teach people like empathy, and that she has led her whole family astray. And I'm like, but they're all adults at this point, and I do not understand why a whole family had to be murdered over one single child. Right. What is happening? Right. Sorry, but tell us about Sophie. Why so desperately did you need sole custody? Right. Why was there not a way to find some sort of mutual ground there so that everyone could be in her life? Right. Like these things do it all the time. So messy, but this is not the way to solve it. So she was put into Child Protective Services when this happened. There's not a lot to be known about her, which I don't pictures of her, which is good. I don't fault that at all. A family member Chris and Kenneth Rhoden's other brother, he said she's she's great. Like, she's very well taken care of. Like, she's living her life. So whatever solace we can get out of that, like, she deserves to have a good and happy life in whatever way she can. So if that is just by completely being removed from association with us, then let her have it.
I agree wholeheartedly. Angela, I hope you're right. God, that's awful.
If you watch it, you're gonna be irate with like the whole like section of like them. Like, this family makes you want to punch holes in a wall.
But I guess so. Right now, this is still technically an active like investigation / murder trial, because they still have one person to kind of go through that trial with.
Mm-hmm.
There's still questions like, what is the weed? What did the money have anything to do with it? Like, why did you throw money on? Was it to throw off the scent?
That's what it feels like. Is it feels like you heard these things about other people getting busted for their weed operations, and you were like, we'll just make it look like a drug cartel did it, and we'll totally get away with it. What's up, Alaska?
So it's like, and then like the couple in Kentucky, what, like, you know, what's going on? Like, what's the connection there? So there's just still things that I'm like, we don't quite have all of the answers yet, probably because it is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But even with all the things we have, I'm like, while the public doesn't deserve to have a motive, I just feel like the motive we have been given does not equate with the action that occurred, if that makes sense. Like, I mean, I guess that's why people are fascinated with true crime, right? Like, you never get a true motive. Like,
I think
sometimes
it also has a lot to do with like the personalities of people involved. Because if you're the kind of person who has to be on top and has to have control, and you feel that someone is taking that from you,
right.
Like, what extent are you going to go to in your mind rectify that? Like,
right.
I mean, clearly this was a stupid way to do it. Not the correct choice, but like, that's why like, they always say like serial killers get like cocky and things like that. And it has to do with just the type of person. Like,
that's true.
If you're the type of person who's like, oh, you're not going to let me see my granddaughter. Great. Fuck you. I'm going to plot your murder.
I'm gonna plot you.
Who are you?
All of your
Who
family.
are you to take that away from me? You know what I mean? So like, people are wild.
Thank you for listening to us talk about this. This is a hard episode to talk about. Like, me and Brett have both teared up. So
yeah.
Anything with kids and dogs, man.
I just want those babies to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And yeah, I guess with that, I hope people take care of each other. And, you know, since this is actively going on, you can follow this in the news. It's still, because they made a documentary on like oxygen and whatnot, like it's made national news. So
yeah, there's one that you can watch in its entirety on YouTube. I think that might be the oxygen one. And then there's like a 4-part one that just came out within the last like year or so, probably because of this court case that's supposed to be happening this year. It's really well done, and it gives you a lot of insight into this, like the nitty gritties that we didn't quite get into. There's a lot of like the press conference footage and things like that from the time and the ongoing investigations. And then there's also like their family members who, you know, can share some insight into these people who were tragically taken. So, and yeah, I don't think there's any books on this yet, but I'm sure it'll happen someday. Yes.
So yeah, if you guys want to keep, I guess, in tune with it, this is really the first thing we've talked about that's recent that you can actually kind of follow along with and do a really deep dive. But again, there's still right now more questions than answers, and I can only hope that with any new answers people may get, that the surviving family and the children still get to live like happy lives and have kind of like, I hope justice is served the best way it can be.
Yeah.
And I hope that
you
know,
want them to have whatever peace they can about
yes,
it. So
yes.
if it's that they need closure, wonderful. If they don't need that, great. I just want them to get whatever they need.
Yes. Also, God, 8 years is a long time.
That's so incredibly frustrating to just be in limbo
For 8 years.
that entire time.
Yes. With that, we will post information, like pictures and stuff that we can, so that you guys get an idea of who's who. So that way you're not like, you guys said the name George like 8 million times, and I'm not sure which George you're referring to.
And Chris.
And Chris. And, take care of each other. I hope you have a good rest of your week. I hope that things settle down a little bit. And yeah, that's what I'm hopeful for. I'm manifesting it, as our coworker likes to say.
Speaking it into existence.
That's right.
Listen, by the time you hear this, we'll be on the other side of Mercury retrograde. So
Thank God.
let's get out of the Gatorade, Mercury.
That's right. So thank you to our spooky sponsor.
Thank you, spooky sponsor.
And everyone take care of one another and stay spooky, friends.